Okay, so let's get going. I think you're all familiar with the format now, but we have the chat box, which you're all using very well at the moment. We've got the Q&A box. Please put any specific questions in the Q&A box. It allows us to track it and make sure they're answered. This, of course, is the second part of the tutorial and assignment, short tutorial and assignment, this being the review. Hopefully you all received a recording of the session yesterday, and as always, I will send another link to download the recording of this review session. So yeah, let's begin. Over to you, Simon.
Cool. So yes, thank you everyone who joined yesterday. Thank you everyone who took part in the assignment, and thank you everyone who submitted it. Out of the selection of around 100 submissions, I've brought my selection down to 28 photos that I'll hopefully cover during this session of review. If I don't cover your photograph specifically, it doesn't mean it wasn't any good or that it wasn't in some way special. It's just that these are photographs that I think everyone can benefit from hearing something about, whereas those ideas that I cover with these photographs might also apply to your photograph. But I don't think there were any specific photographs that I chose not to include because they were bad images. They were all pretty decent. I think Robin would agree that they were all photographically competent and seem to have absorbed some aspect of the actual conceptual side of it, which is mainly what I'll be talking about, not the merit of the images as images, but whether or not they can communicate an idea. That's what I'm going to be looking at through these images. So this is the first image by Andrew Blowers. I know Andy. I know that the concept behind this is about his identity as a musician. He's included his bass guitar. It's a multiple exposure. I think that conceptually, yes, it shows that role as a musician. It shows it, I like the layering of the image, but I think that photographically the execution could be a little better. I think in terms of things like adding a little bit of motion rather than being quite static. If you have a little bit of blur just for a bit of energy. I also think that the layers are a bit confusing. If this were just one photo or the other photo, it would be clear what was going on. But I think the layers kind of takes away a little bit. But if you were to use the base as the main subject of the photograph, then keeping the base in the same place and moving yourself around it or moving your hands around it would make a lot more sense than layering different aspects of the craft, because I can see what's been tried, but I don't know that it's the best execution of that, I think. Sorry, I've just seen the Q&A boxes flashed, but I'm not able to load it up.
Oh, he's saying he's here if you'd like him to comment.
Yeah, if he's got anything to say, put it in the chat box.
Chat box.
And I can address anything like that. For some reason, I'm not able to open the Q&A. I'll figure out why that is.
That's why I can monitor the questions.
All right. Oh, here it is. For some reason, it won't let me have it in full screen. Okay. Well, yeah. Robin, then if you notice anything interesting or worth saying from the Q&A or from the chat box, do let me know.
Yes.
And then I'll just focus on the images. So this one is from Amy Hunter. I think again, this one, you've got the inclusion of the camera, you've got inclusion of some context. Photographically, there's a nice kind of balance to the frame. You've got the emptiness on the right hand side, the fullness on the left, and then there's the use of the body, the use of the hair to hide aspects of the self that seem to be hidden, which I think is a good. You can feel that there's an idea there that she has about herself. I don't think that I don't think that's a bad concept, but I do think that, but because these photographs are staged, there's planning that goes into each part of it. So when I look at these images, I assume that each part was considered. So when you have something like the inclusion of a camera or the inclusion of a gesture, normally I would say to only focus on one of those things at a time, because otherwise it becomes almost a collage of too many things, and it becomes unclear as to which is the most important thing that I should take away from this. So when I look at this image, should I be taking away that you have that you have the role of the camera in your life, that you have the role of this emotion in your life, or that you have this kind of spatial, the way you've composed it. Which of those things should be the most important to take away from it? And I don't know that that comes across. So, you could take this image and you can make 3 images that focus on individual things out of it, rather than putting it all into one frame. This image I think is quite interesting, because there's a lot of connotations around the the X-ray film. The it's very dramatic. There's a lot of, any technical aspect of the lighting aside, there's a very stark mood. It's very open, and I think it's almost very. I hate the word intimate because it doesn't really mean anything, but it's a very it's not a way of meeting someone that I would normally expect. There's clearly something that's being tried to say. There's a lot of semiotic involvement with the use of the imagery that's been included, and I think it's quite powerful, whether or not the meaning is something that I can take away that's specific when I see it as to when someone else sees it. Does that make sense? And also, Robin, if you have anything to say about any of these images, do
Well,
jump in.
actually, I was going to say, just I'd like to encourage people to, to give us some feedback on what you think of the images that are being shown, because it would be interesting, to give your own comments, because we've all got different perspectives, I think. So yeah, please do put your comments down, and we'll be reading some of them out, so that make sure that Simon hears what you're saying.
Yeah, I think
But yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
I thought this one was really strong. It's one that I remembered immediately from flicking through the hundreds or so, or even more images. Very strong expression, and yeah, I just think the concept's fantastic.
It really is.
I haven't really seen one like this before, so a very new, fresh take on a self-portrait.
Yeah, it's very, someone in the comments has said it's very immediate, and I agree. There's something about this that you can't. It doesn't take a lot of time to process this photograph. It's right there in front of you. There's no beating around the bush. It's not ambiguous. That is to say, it's very ambiguous, but it's very clear that there is a very clear something for anyone who wants to take that something away. This photograph, I think, I like the way that it's a mesh of human and nature. I think that can be a very clear way to describe yourself if you have this affinity with anything, finding aspects of features that can be included and then merging as one. But I think execution wise, the depth of field is too much. If you use a deep depth of field and flatten it out a little bit, like a 90mm f16, a little bit further away, make everything flat, then you really photographically merge the two concepts. Whereas conceptually here, you can see what the photographer's gone for, but I don't think it's been executed just right. Robin, if you have any insight on how this image would be made better, using any technical camera tricks.
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, again, it's up for debate, but I think as well that it should have like a deeper depth of field. So just stopping down the aperture a little bit. I don't know, and I kind of not sure if the color, the greens, are adding anything from my perspective. I'm not sure. I mean, I'd quite like to see it as a black and white conversion, and kind of maybe bringing up some of the textures.
Yeah, I don't know that would do too much for me. I see black and white and color as fulfilling very different needs. And I think if the photograph is about a connection with nature, then green, brown, earthy tones would make sense. But then I think if you're going with that, wear a brown shirt or wear a green shirt or something that doesn't give you this the sea of black on the shoulders, that would
But I mean, from my point of view, it would be extremely important to have it in black and white, to have the eye in a deeper focus, because then we'd start making relationships between the circular shape at the front and the eye shape at the back. We'd start putting those forms together, and it would become more relevant. I don't know. And I think without the color being there, we'd make that relationship more quickly, perhaps.
I see what you're saying. So by removing the color, you're left with only the shapes. And then I'd also say by deepening the depth of field, you actually get more shapes. You get all the shapes of the leaves in the background. You're able to add more circles to the image, and it becomes more about a sea of shapes of which the person is only one, interacting with these other shapes. I got you. Yeah, that makes sense.
And
Cool.
I see
Black and white it is.
Michael suggesting there, also another play would be to reverse the depth of field.
How would that work?
As in focus on the eye.
Focus on the eye.
The foreground blur.
The thing is, when I look at a photograph that's been presented by a photographer, I assume that all of the decisions were made deliberately. So if this image is exactly what the photographer intended, then it means that they have deliberately chosen to render themselves out of focus, that it's not just something aesthetic, and that has its own meanings. That has, it shows that they're less important than the nature. It lowers them on the hierarchy. So, but without the artist contributing and giving us an idea of what they had in mind, I can only assume that. But I do prefer to give benefit of the doubt and think that everything was considered. But for sure, if there's a different interpretation where the photographer chose to focus on their own eye and to leave the nature out of focus, then that would be a good execution. But I think if it's about that initial balance of man and nature, then it should be a balanced depth of field, deep enough that everything is equalized. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought this photograph was quite interesting. It takes maybe a few seconds to figure out. I think the photographer Benjamin Reisner, I think they clearly have a very good grasp of energy, communicated visually. I think that this is one of those photographs where you can look really close and you can try and figure out, like, is this cling film or water or some abstract gel that they might have in a photo studio. Figure out what the expression, what's going on in the face if you really pick it apart and look at each piece of the photograph. But when you view it as a whole, I think it's one of the more unique visual ones that we received. And I don't know quite what feedback would be appropriate, because I think as a photographic execution, it's fine. It's great. It looks great. In terms of whether or not it fits the brief, I'll probably never know, because without knowing this person, I can only know what aspects the photograph is showing me. And the photograph shows me as someone who, I pick apart photographs just as standard. So to me, it shows that this person has put a lot of thought into the photograph, but I don't know that I would see what it communicates about them, if that makes sense. Robin, you probably see it differently, maybe, and maybe people in the comments as well.
No, I mean, this is again another one that definitely caught my attention, and it took me a long time to kind of figure out actually what was going on in the image, and I kind of enjoyed that time, that it took to work my eye around the image and finally kind of land on what I think is the human form in the image. But I find it visually kind of beautiful, and the movement does just continue to make you wander around the frame.
Yeah, you really get a sense of fluidity, and I think that there's so many things about an image like this where it feels a little bit random. But again, when you decide that this is the photographer's choice, then aspects like this, where you've got the scratch marks or the watermarks from if it's a film photograph, or if they've been added, what those represent, the fact that they're going through the person's head, the way that you can make out, roughly the face that he's lost in this image, but you can find him. I think that there are some very interesting connotations you can take away. There's a lot going on, and I think even though it's not compositionally busy, it's very busy conceptually, and I quite like that. There's a lot to unpack. This photograph, I think, is a clearer photograph than the last one, but I think it's got just as much to unpack. I think if this is I think it's a composite where the person has photographed themselves twice. Am I getting that right?
Unless Cam has a twin.
I wouldn't know. But then even if they do, I think that
You're correct.
the choice that, for example, you know, the player in the white shirt is playing the black pieces, and the same the other way around. There's a very, you know, there's balance there. You could go in deeper, and you can look in at, you know, what moves specifically are being played. Maybe there's something in that. You can look in at the books that are being written, and that tells you something. So this is a much clearer, structured idea where you can take away aspects of duality, aspects of mentalism, aspects of, you know, the interests that are apparent in those books. If the depth of field were deeper, I think you could tell a bit more about the context of what's going on out the window. And I don't know that there would be much visually that isn't included, but I think that in terms of the I know this is going to be like a nitpick, and it's a very, you know, I don't normally do that kind of thing, but I just think that as a photograph, just bringing it up just so that it starts at the books, because you've got a lot of space around here, but to really bring you into the concentration of the faces, if that's essential to reading into the face of the person and then looking around and then figuring out, I think I'd rather be drawn to the faces first than the other elements of the composition. And I think by allowing that space around the outside takes away from that to an extent. Okay. So this photograph and the next photograph are from the same photographer, Carly Adby. These, I think, can we see them full screen? Yes. Is everyone able to see that?
Yep.
Cool. This image and the last image, I think, photographically, again, they're very simple. They focus in on very clear aspects of the person. And I think there are some very clear, again, there's this semiotic engagement that I have with the concept. So when I see this photograph, I think of like ballet and dancers. And the same with this image. I think it's a very, it's almost aggressively related to the way that the body moves, and to have a dissected clinical understanding of different aspects of the person specifically makes me think of you know, of dance, of motion, even though they're very still images. I thought it was interesting to include these two images separately, and I think that this would be something that I would talk about when it comes to my diptych concept, which is something that we brought up yesterday and which I've now produced a concept for. So hopefully there'll be another webinar coming on that topic. But these two images I would definitely present as one image, but with two frames. And I think that's something that I'll be able to talk about at a later date.
Can you pull those? Can you pull those two up together just to see them side by side?
If you tell me.
Yeah, just select the other one as well, and just hit M.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's interesting to see them side by side.
Yeah, I would probably include this one on the left personally, yeah. But again, sequencing I'll talk about later on when I talk about presenting it work as a diptych.
Yeah, beautiful images.
We're back in develop window. So this photograph is by Dan, and Dan I actually met back in 2017. I'm not sure if he remembers me, but I think that my understanding of this photograph is influenced by the fact that I know him, or that I met him briefly. Whether that means that oh, you remember me? Lovely. Well, it's good to see you're doing well. Yeah. So the context that I met him in informs my understanding of this image, where he's presenting as kind of an adventuring character. You know, we've got this you know, earthy tones that puts him at a level with nature. We've got that he's looking up and off camera, and I also like that the way that it's framed, the fact that you've got the foreground first. I don't think in any of the images so far that there's been a specific use of framing through something. And obviously as a self-portrait, to make this photograph, you've got to go and put the camera at a certain place, understand where the leaves are going to be, and then go and stand so that you're revealed, but so that most of the frame is concealed. And to me, this gives the sense of kind of venturing into the unknown. into concealing the path that the person is kind of directing themselves towards in the frame. So I think that definitely comes across conceptually, and I think even someone who hadn't met Dan would kind of know this. Is that something you get, Robin? And you said you also know him from
I
somewhere.
do, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think this is extremely well executed. I mean, it looks like a still from a TV show
Mm.
that be used in promotion. But yeah, I mean, as you say, it's a really great use of that foliage in the foreground that draws you in, and the light is absolutely perfect on the face.
Yeah, there's that definite if we go in just on the expression, you've got the shadow is on the side of the face that's a little bit more, there's a little bit more aggression there. Maybe not aggression, but there's this wonder in this eye, and then there's something more going on the side that's in shadow. Yeah. This is an interesting one. This is probably the closest we've got so far to one of you. And again, this focus on the eye, that it's meeting us dead on. That we're the composition is made of his face. The foreground is the hair. The background, is almost not a part of the photograph because it's all him. This bit doesn't matter. It's about the eye, and the way that that's being communicated, I think, is quite powerful. It's that I think when you look out from the side, there's like an aspect of fearfulness. A lot of the time, there's like that he's noticing something happening offside, but that the camera's level. That's an equal footing. I think that's quite an interesting use of the structure of the image, I think. This one I thought was quite interesting. There's a similar use of motion to the one a few slides ago, but I think it's because it's in color, you get a little bit more in terms of the use of this idea that as your body are part of the atmosphere that you're in. If you're in a very blue neutral toned room and have whatever your skin tones are, being able to incorporate aspects like movement, which kind of even you out, it almost paints you into the rest of the scene. So yeah, long exposures. If you allow the body to be not contorted, but what's the word I'm looking for, Robin? Where you're it's almost like you're painting yourself into the rest of the color, and whatever your tones are, they become evened out to the tones of the room. So even if you're a light-skinned person in a very dark room, you can still even yourself out into middle gray almost the more you move and the longer the exposure goes on for. And that's what I like about this image, is that they have become as one, or become as close by constantly moving in this space that allows the motion of the head and the skin tones of the head to be very different to the rest of the body. Merged, that's the one. Thank you, Gerard. So this image and the next image I was going to talk about similarly, because they've both used the context of the class itself and have included aspects of their screen and my slideshow playing on their screen. And this person's using their keyboard to write something, this person's making notes. And I think there's I think very often when you see a photograph of this idea of studiousness or study, the way that what study looks like or what concentration looks like to someone else is almost always like face scrunched up, and there's like an effort going on in the face, and they're concentrating on something. But I don't think that that's always the most natural. That's not what concentration looks like. If you're actually paying attention to something, you don't do all that. You just allow yourself to experience it. So seeing this idea of someone taking a lesson in such different ways, that what you're seeing is the hands, and you can go in deeper to an image like this, and you can figure out what comments are they maybe reading, or what how far have they got in terms of their note making, what notes are they actually making. This person has written something about you and have decided that that's something that they want to include, that the very aspect of making a note that what they should photograph is about them is worth including in a photograph about them. It's almost very meta, you know. Um, and again, including this idea that you're interacting with someone, that especially, this is quite a topical webinar. The reason we're having it almost is that, you know, there's no other way for this kind of interaction to take place with lots of student and a teacher figure. So to have this photograph where they're not just learning, but they're interacting with the tool that's connecting them to other people, I think is quite telling. I think, Robin, do you agree? Is that something that you would have thought as well?
Well, it's one thing I'd say is I don't think that conceptually. So I can say this on the whole of a lot of the images. Like, I wish I could come up with some of these ideas. Um, I mean, I both think they're very interesting takes on a self-portrait. I probably find the second one visually more interesting to look at, because I start to study more of the details inside the shot. So I'm trying to, as a viewer, trying to figure out myself, you know, what is this image about? If it's entitled a self-portrait, I'm trying to then get more of a sense of the person. I'm looking at the, you know, the photograph at the back left. You know, I'm looking at the layout of the room, noticing it's in an attic room. All these things are kind of informing me. The image on the mug, they all tell parts of the story.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that as well is interesting, because not all of that can be planned. Like, if I take a photograph in a room, it's going to be whatever room I have access to. That's not a deliberate communication of me saying something, but the fact that that's what I have access to does say something, whether I want it to or not. So when you see in a photograph like this, you know, you can drive yourself mad going like, oh, maybe the depth of the coffee means something, and there's like a special, you know, the way he's angled the pen. But no, that's more likely to be something that's happenstance. But when we're talking about this in terms of a self-portrait, all of that happenstance is part of your life, part of the life of the person who's photographing it. So whether you choose to include it or not is more important than whether you plan specifically what those things mean, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There doesn't need to have been a meaning put behind each and every one of these specific things, but the meaning is there regardless, because the context of this image we're receiving it in is, this is you. And if we're being told this is you, this is a self-portrait, then we're going to look into what could it mean that you live in this space.
There's a little comment there. Gerard's asking, what about the temperature?
Temperature. That's an interesting one as well. I feel like this would be the natural. This feels like one of those cameras where it just gives you whatever the color balance it feels like. You know, it's like
It's
this
balancing
kind
for
of
the
a warm
screen,
red.
isn't it? I guess is the
You know
more
what? That's
powerful
probably right.
lens.
I don't have color balance on black and white film, so that's probably more correct coming from Robin than from me. Which is why I thought this one was interesting, because it removes the tones of the room, whether that was a deliberate. I find that when I photograph in rooms where I've done no planning or done no experimentation, and it has to be in color, they'll normally come out something like this, just because maybe there are more powerful colors involved. But I'm not an expert when it comes to that kind of thing. So maybe Robin, if you have more to say on that.
I mean, I personally, I enjoy how the color balance has ended up, whether that was on purpose or by mistake. But yeah, I like the warm tones that then kind of frame up that screen even more so. Obviously, if you cooled it down and balanced for the room, the screen would be, I think, very distracting, because it'd be blue. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
I like the warm tones that are created.
Yeah, it makes the space feel a little bit more homely, but then it makes the space of the screen feel a bit more clinical. So I think that can be exaggerated or enhanced as per the preference of the photographer.
Yeah.
So this next one's quite interesting. Again, it's very close. The decision to have a lot of light here but not a lot of light here is interesting, because even a slight tilt would have given you more light on the eye. But as it is, we have to kind of peer in to see that not only is the eye open, but it's looking directly at us. I think that's quite an interesting. You know, that's an interesting way to present your eye, because I think a lot of portraits are all about the eyes. You know, you say you've always got to make eye contact. You put the eye in the center, who do a lot of things. But when it comes to self-portraits, a lot of people conceal their face entirely, conceal their eye. But this choice to do both, to both close yourself off a little bit, but to still be aware of the outside, I think that conceptually is quite strong. This next one is there were a few images where the camera itself was incorporated. So people, probably fairly obviously, if you're in this workshop, you probably identify quite strongly with photography, the role of the photographer, and your interaction with the camera. So choosing to use a camera to reflect yourself, while also, there's more than one camera here. You've got the camera that's taking the picture, the camera that's being used as a background / reflective surface, and then you've got the photographer themselves. And in this screen, the photographer is almost the smallest part of the frame. You cause a very diminutive effect. If you when you photograph yourself, even if you feel that photography is large, whether consciously or subconsciously, you're saying that your role is smaller. That you are less of a role in that the camera is doing the work. Is that something you agree with, Robin, or
No, I agree. I mean,
too much in?
just on another note, I mean, I think this is an interesting idea, pretty well done. But again, just from a visual point, I'm extremely distracted by the Uitlander of Uitlander.
Yeah, that's a really odd way of spelling Leica. I've never seen it done that way.
Yeah, it's the wrong camera, first of all, obviously. But no, I think that the text I find so dominant that my eye just leans to the left-hand side, where the beautiful detail is obviously in the top right-hand corner.
Yeah, I think that if the whole image would just, if we just put it to that, it becomes about the person, and then the camera becomes the concept of a camera, because anyone who knows about photography will go, oh yeah, that's a Voigtlander, that's a camera. But if you don't know about photography, and I try and assume that people looking at my photographs are not photographers, what are they going to think? They're going to think, oh, it's someone and they're in this device. Maybe it's a screen, maybe it's a reflective surface. There'll be a little bit more ambiguity, and that way you're not communicating just with people to show off the prestige of that you have this camera, but it becomes about you, and it becomes about you in the concept of the camera. The idea of the camera matters less than the idea of you reflected in the camera, and that's what the focus.
Another comment from Nick saying he thinks the choice of camera though says a lot about the the person.
I can see that. I can see that there's an interpretation to people who know about cameras. But what I'm saying is that when you show this photograph to a non-photographer, they're not going to know what the choice of camera says at all, because they'll, if they even identify it as a camera, And I think it's interesting what you say, Robin, about the writing, because I think one of my personal values in photography at all is that writing stops you dead, because you stop and read it, and then once you've read it, you think you have absorbed what the photo means. So when this photograph has lots of writing, but the writing is more about the context of what's going on, because I know what the context is, and because he's taking notes, there's a transmission of those words from the screen to the notepad, whereas here the word is incidental, so I wouldn't, it's less relevant to the context of the image in a way. There were a few submissions like these. I think it's always interesting the use of ideas like hands. So because when we look to identify a person, if you were to look at this photograph and the hand wasn't there, it would be a series of squares, and there would be like a lump, and you wouldn't necessarily associate that lump with a person. No offense, of course, to Julie Turner. I'm not saying that you're a lump. That's not. But what I'm saying is that to make this image about a human, to make it about a person, you include the hand. You bring it up, and that's something that you go, oh, so that's a hand, so that must mean that's a head, and then you identify the ear, the hair. It becomes a lot more apparent. And I think it's interesting that we choose to include those kinds of almost context clues. It almost shows a fear. It's a fear that if I show this photograph, what if they don't know it's me? What if they can't identify humanity in this photograph? I better make that clear. I better include more signs to show that I'm here. And I think, again, that's one of those things where I'm really reading into what's gone on. It probably isn't as deep as that. They've probably just gone, I'll put my hand up because it will look nice, you know. But I think these ideas are things that if you choose to be aware of them, if you choose to be aware as much as possible, then you can really feel what idea you transmit in a photograph, because this is my reading of it. And it could be that this is just a really happy photograph and they're going hi, but I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing something, you know, quite not pseudo deeper. But whether that's the artist's intention or not, I think isn't clear. I think if the intention was to make them a clear person, it's not just so Fiona said, is it not just an expressive action, but it's an indicator of a thought reaching out? Absolutely. So there are so many different ways that you can read this photograph, that this just happens to be mine. And it's because I'm in the mindset of, I've got a stack of 28 portraits in front of me. I've got to say something about each of them. And maybe that's having more of an effect on the way that on what I'm bringing to the photograph than what the photograph means. Nick has said waving or drowning. Exactly. There are so many different ways you can unpack it, but I don't think we would be unpacking as much if the hand wasn't there, if they'd chosen to include something else, or if they'd even turned their head and it was, you know, the silhouette of a person and they were looking at their hand or looking away from their hand. There would be more in that. But the more thought that goes into these points, the more you're able to take control of that. So if you know that these are the kinds of ideas that someone might bring to a photograph, you can say, okay, well, what ideas do I want to emphasize? What do I want to not emphasize? And that means that you're going to put a lot more thought into it, which means that even if this is exactly the same photograph concept that you produce again, with all that in mind, you'll always have a response when someone asks you, what does the hand mean? Robin, do you agree? Before we move on to the next one, because I think I said quite a bit there.
Well, for me, I think you almost hit the nail on the head in the fact that I took a fairly similar image to this a few weeks ago using something like a fence panel. And it's funny that you said that having that fear of, you know, thinking about the view and not being able to identify what it is in the image. And I did exactly that for that reason. I was raising my hand because I wanted it to be easily identified as human form.
Yeah, it's a really interesting it's a very sociological, kind of anthropological understanding of this need to be seen. I think the part of self-portraiture is about, you know, leaving some kind of mark or leaving an identity. And what I'm about to say is probably incorrect, because there might have been some more recent discovery, but I think the earliest indication of what could be a self-portrait or could be a recognition of a mark left behind by a human was a cave painting, but it wasn't a depiction. It was just a red dot that had been left as like a thumbprint, and I think that's the earliest, like, I am here available, but it's not a person. It doesn't show a person. It doesn't represent a person, but it represents that person's mark. So I think that if that is the purpose of a self-portrait, then it becomes, then almost anything else almost doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what aspects of yourself you choose to include. It doesn't matter how afraid you are that you're not going to be identified as human, because what you're saying is, I am here, and the rest almost doesn't matter. I also think it's pretty interesting that red dot. Sorry,
I was going to say, it's probably why I rejected my photo, and I just didn't know why.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, now I know.
I was going to say this is more trivia than anything, but I think that red dot is equally interesting because the first mouse cursor on a computer was also a red dot. And I think the connection there, whether that was intentional or not, the fact that our first step into this digital landscape, sorry, this has got nothing, I've gone completely off photography now, but our first step into this digital landscape has almost exactly the same imagery as our earliest understanding of a person going, I am here. Anyway, that was something. I think this is quite I don't want to say standard, but it's a very clear, you know, it's a person in a space. It's as close, I think it's probably as close so far as to what you would get if someone said, I want you to take a picture of me. And you'd go, okay, go and sit by the window, there's some light, we'll take the picture. I think it's, I think in some ways, I think that makes it both more and less conceptual than the others, because it's straightforward, but there's still a lot going on, because the concentration here is more in the body language, in the pose, in the shirt being over the shoulder, the facial expression being a little bit they're both ignoring what's going on outside and what's going on with the camera. They're not connecting to anything. The choice is here to show this person is more in their expression than the space. And I think so far the images have mostly been about the space and the person's relationship to the space. Whereas I think here there's a photograph of someone who's choosing not to be connected, which I think is quite interesting. But that's what comes across to me. The next photograph, I think, is almost a response to the I don't know, was it a tirade or a rant from two images ago about that fear of the form? Because I think this photograph probably looks the least like a person. There's little going on here to show I am a picture. There's not that fear that this is going to be misconstrued, because it's a subtle face, and you've got to take a few seconds to go, okay, eyelashes, nose, mouth, and it's there. But because of that connected to the space of the curves of the I want to say it's like a blanket, like a sheet, because of the folds there, they interact here with the folds of the chin, and it becomes more of a squiggly line. It's much less clear, and I think that it's interesting to have the you've got the folds of the face, the folds of the sheet. There's a nice kind of synergy going on there, I think. What do you think, Robin? Did this stand out to you immediately as being like a profile of a face, or do you think there's something in the compression or in the distortion maybe that's going on here?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think this one is like one which was almost there. I don't know. I don't know. For me, I feel like I needed potentially more of the profile showing. Maybe that's it. I don't know.
So you think that it's not clear enough that it's a person, that you might spend too long, that it's too abstract or too ambiguous?
Perhaps it's that. But I do, as you say, I do enjoy the folds, in the fabric, whatever it is, like a bed sheet or something.
Yeah.
I do enjoy the way they break into the face, and the way that the chin, runs off to the bottom. I think that's interesting in itself, but I feel like it's almost there, but not quite.
Yeah, I think with an image like this, I'd have to see it alongside a lot more of the artist's work, because if this is their way of choosing to portray people, if they would prefer to have a more abstract, ambiguous presentation, that would become clear in the body of work. Whereas I think for you, because you said you dismissed an image you took because it didn't have that clarity, that might just be your preference.
Yeah, and I think, again, you're hitting the nail on the head there. Seeing how this works alongside, the visual vision of the artist would make all the difference when nitpicking it, looking at it as an individual image, and
Yeah.
it's a big difference there, isn't there?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's why when we look at these images, we've got to take them completely in the context that they've been made, which is it's a self-portrait. So I've got to assume that this is saying something about the person. So when I read into this, the folds and the distortion and the lessening of the profile for the sake of this kind of minimalist line aesthetic, I've got to assume that's the artist saying or trying to say something, and that maybe by doing something differently, by turning the head more, by having a more clear defined shape, that would be your self-portrait, but we can't say it would be anyone else's. That's not it's a very difficult thing to criticize, because we unless we know you, or unless we know exactly what you're going for, who are we to say that this photograph isn't you? This might be the most honest depiction, this might be the most honest self-portrait of all time, and we wouldn't know, because we don't have that context aside from that it is a self-portrait. I think that's important to keep in mind with any feedback.
There's a question there
Yep.
from Douglas. I don't know if you've seen it.
Is there a difference between setting up a camera with a self-timer or asking someone else to take the same shutter? Yes, I think that if someone else presses the shutter, they are the photographer, and this is maybe more from a legal standpoint. But if I set up a studio, if I set up all these things in a studio and I position the model, and I've paid for everything, and then my assistant comes over and presses the shutter, they I think legally own that photograph. So if I set up a self-portrait and then get someone else to come over and take the shot, maybe I can say that's a self-portrait, maybe not, but I would prefer, just for my own peace of mind, that, you know, if it's a self-timer or a remote trigger or something that allows me to be in control of every single step. But then there's also a scenario where you have a concept and you ask someone else to execute it. I think that would be their photograph. I try not to get bogged down in like nitpicking definitions, because I don't know that it's very useful. But if you know, if you feel that it's a self-portrait, it's a self-portrait. If there are some portrait photographers who exclusively take photographs of other people, but they say every photo I take is a self-portrait of me. It's all about me, and that's fine, because that's what they're seeing in other people. But it's them pressing the shutter. I think for it to be your photograph, you press the shutter. Do you agree, or do you disagree?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I do agree. I mean,
Or if anyone in the comments
I think
disagrees.
I think there's also something about the fact that, you know, how you choose to portray yourself for yourself or for someone else. You know, although you might think you're revealing yourself in exactly the same way, I don't know. It's the psychological element maybe that Douglas was kind of touching on as well, that you can't help but change, you know, how you are when you're with someone, and it depends who that person is, whether it's a stranger, whether it's a close family friend, whether it's, you know, somebody you know very well or not so well.
Yeah, there'll always be the act or the mask.
Yeah.
Even if there's someone else even present. But then some of these photographs, and I think we'll get to them, include other people, and I think those are interesting as well, because that might affect the aspect of themselves that they're bringing across. But we'll get to those. Cool. I hope that answers your question. This photograph I thought was pretty interesting. I think it's quite a unique use of the light, because it really it adds something very very different to the visual, to the nature of the person. I think to the eye, there's this glow, and I think there's a lot in that. I think, you know, whether you feel that light is supposed to be coming from within, or whether that's an effect of the light interacting with the eye, or that it's moving through something. I think that there's a, I don't know, the image initially makes me feel quite almost uncomfortable. There's a complete detachment from everything. I think that the light and the effect of the light, but the complete neutrality of the face. I think there's the fact that the only thing going on is this interaction of the light and the face, and it renders the person almost unpersonally. You know, it's them as an aesthetic thing. You know, and I think that could say a lot about the way this person sees themselves, if they are there for forces to act upon them. You know, I think in terms of aesthetically, I think it's great. I think it looks fantastic. I think that maybe seeing it from a more natural way to look at someone could be more interesting, because I think if I were to present it this way, they're looking up and off camera, whereas this way they're looking right directly to the edge of the frame, and it's
Becomes much more claustrophobic that way, actually.
Yeah, it's a bit jarring. It's definitely powerful, but I don't know that I would have a lot to unpack with it conceptually, just because I wouldn't know what to say. But I think that aesthetically it's fantastic. The use of the light, the use of color, the use of this understanding, this person, to take this photograph, you've got to know how the light acts. You've got to know how to position yourself so that the light has that effect. So I think that shows quite a strong grasp of the the photographic side of things. Yeah. Next photograph. So this one's by Miguel, and I don't know, again, seeing this photograph as a photographer, I find almost amusing, because I know that I know that he's holding an M6. I know that there's no time I know Miguel, so I know that he's told me that it's not a film photograph, it's digital. So, but the way that he's presented, as if he's photographing in a mirror. You know, the camera's there as if that is the camera that's taking the shot. But because I know it isn't, it's almost funny to me because it's like a prestige. You know, he's using the camera like a piece of jewelry to show off. But I know it's not like that. I know it's about the role that the camera has in his life. But I do find it quite funny that it's there, but it's not doing anything. You know, because I think that without that camera, you actually get a much more intimate image. You know, I think that you know, actually there's a lot going on in this photograph. There's this intimacy, there's the relationship. And I think if the image were just about that, if it were just them holding each other, then it would be a photograph about them. But because he's playing up for the camera, he's got his eyebrow going on, he's got the camera going on, because he's being playful, and I don't know that the rest of the scene reads as playful, I think there's a bit of a disconnect. But maybe that's the nature of their relationship. I don't know enough to comment on that. But I think that this is a photograph, where there's a lot going on, and where it really could be 2 or 3 photographs separately, exploring each of those different ideas, but including them in one feels a bit jarring. And again, obviously, photographically, it's nice. The light's nice. The vignette's nice. It's a well executed photograph of several concepts that I think can be separated out, studied, figured out what's going on with the inclusion of the significant other, what's going on with the inclusion of the camera, what's going on with the facial expression. And by experimenting with each of those things in combination, you can figure out a way that creates a more coherent image. And I think that there's potential for each of those images to be powerful, but I don't know that this image has the power that it could. Do you agree, Robin, or do you think I've gone too far?
So that's interesting. I mean, I get the feeling. I mean, I find it humorous, this image as well, but I feel that is the intention of the photographer. Maybe not. I mean, I kind of feel it is that raised eyebrow.
Yeah, there's a playfulness, but I think if you're going for a playful image, then the rest of the image, the vignette and the kind of moodiness of the aesthetic doesn't match up with the tone of the emotion. The emotional content could be there.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. That's the next photograph. This one I found quite interesting because this is a photo of a photo, and it's a photo of a photo that's been, deformed. And I think that can mean a few things, especially about the way you perceive yourself. Because if you look at each of these pieces individually, it seems to be a person with something of a smile on their face. There's definitely not a hateful or angry look. But when you rip up that smile, when you rip up that positivity, it says something completely different. So, I think the power of this image is in the fact that you can have a photograph where, if this were just the original photograph, it would be a picture of this person's face, and it would be a nice representation of that photograph. But because you've chosen to represent yourself as pieces of yourself, as pieces of a photograph taken in the past, because all photographs were taken in the past, it says something entirely new, and it's a new use of something old. I think it's very interesting and quite powerful. This is another photograph which is about the about a feature. It's the use of the hand, and I quite like how again, I don't know how much claustrophobia I'd be reading into these images if we weren't in lockdown, but I see that the expression of the fingers, because not everyone can bend their fingers in that way, they have to be pressing up against something. So the presence of the glass is there, even if you can't see it. So they're not just reaching there; they're pushing their hand against something. I think the expression that comes through the fingers is quite a lot. That's really evident, where it could just be a hand on a window. There's a real pressure there. I also think that the depth of field is fantastic, that the fingers kind of blend away. The focus is entirely on the knuckle. Aesthetically, I would say this is probably this is probably a square format image. I think that the dark space here doesn't add anything. I'm gonna see how that looks. I think this would be my presentation of the image, but that's that's a nitpick again, and it's not about that. But in terms of the concept, it definitely shows a lot. This photograph. So I like photographs where there's more than one thing going on, and I think that photographically, we've got the lighting set up, we've got these reds and greens. It's very ID magazine kind of hipster trendy colors, and I think there's a good energy there. And then I think that the fact that it's more than just a photograph of her looking in the mirror, but there's this aspect of artistry there, that she's demonstrating this skill of hers. I do think the arrangement of the room could be a little bit less distracting. I think the potted plant, this can stay, and then the inclusion of the light here is interesting because it's not something that I normally do. I do like my light to be diegetic, in that I like that you can tell where in the frame the light's coming from. But if you have set up the lights, then either include it and show and own that the light's there, or hide it. But I think that this is maybe an attempt at concealing it. But I think overall the concept here is strong. I also think that the face taking up such a small part of the frame is interesting, because it gives away something. It gives away the expression, the concentration, but you have to search in the frame for those things, and the rest of it is more important. The important things about the image are the color, the act, the process, the light, the body language, the expression, the shadow. That's all there before you see the face, and I think that's an interesting choice. This is another photograph where I think you bring a lot to this kind of thing, because a lot of people see the lines and they think they can think film noir, or they can think you're in a cage, or you can think any number of things and associate that with this kind of line across the face. Which is why I think that's less important than the body language that's paired with that, because the body language is, very much it's a disinterested boredom, waiting for something kind of expression. You're getting this sense of wistfulness, because the eyes are, they're going off screen into the darkness. They're lit, but they're not looking at anything that we, the audience, can see. So there's that intrigue in the eyes. So I think that the combination, the use of the light here, along with the body language, is the most important thing. Because if it was just one or the other, it would probably not be as powerful. This is another photograph quite similar to the one a couple of slides ago, but I think that the use of color here is fantastic, because you've got another kind of warm toned screen, but everything else is blue, and the painting is blue, and the ink is blue, and you get those blue tones. And obviously, if you want to get into color theory and all that, that's fine. But I think that it's more important that blue is contrasting with the orange than that it means anything itself, if that makes sense. And then you've got the fact that there's no actual aspect of this person that's in focus. You can't see the features in the picture here, because this is a drawing. Obviously, it's not hyper realistic, which means that the only actual piece of the artist that's included in this is the blue thumb. And it shows that the painting, this is a part of them. This is their depiction of themselves has left a mark on them. And I think that being the only aspect of the person that we're seeing is quite an interesting inclusion, because you could have easily just not had that at all. But you've shown that this is the process, this is what's going on, this is where my hand is, this is what it's doing, and this is the impact it's had on me. I think the whole image could just be that, and it would be just as powerful. This is a photograph I like just because it's very. I think we don't think enough about the impact that the creatures or animals that we include in our life have, and I think that the expression that can be given by animals is very human. You get a very human understanding. So when you have an image like this, where it's about a person kind of hiding away, that's the body language. Is this the curl away of the shoulders and the head down? That says something. But then the inclusion of the animal sharing that, I think there's a lot more going on in that kind of balance between them, because it could very easily be, the dog doing whatever and the person doing whatever, but it's that mirroring. It shows that relationship so much more than if it were just one or the other. Again, I think this is a square format image because I don't know that there's a lot going on here that means anything, and I think that bringing us closer in and just highlighting that makes all the difference. And again, there's a lot that you can read into this, because you've got the marks on the knees, you've got the bare feet. You can take the time to unpack whatever you want out of an image, but I think the essential point is that, holding the animal, mirroring their emotions, and that's what matters. This photograph, I think, was interesting because I like so much of it, but I also really dislike the carpet. And I know that sounds like a criticism of your home decoration, but I think that when you've got this idea of holding this reflective surface, showing yourself, showing your eyes, only highlighting the eyes, I think there's so much in that concept where you're just revealing this aspect of yourself, and you're revealing it through something that you're holding, that it allows us as the audience to be the person looking through your eyes at this reflective surface. Having all this distraction around it is not the best way. I think if it was on a cleaner surface, I would probably react to this image much better, because I think there's so much light. The lighting is fantastic, the way it's illuminating through the hair. And I think that if you wanted to use the same space, I think that by having a deeper depth of field, so that the hair and the carpet had more of a relationship, that there would be less for me to find annoying about it. I don't often that's not often a valid criticism, because obviously it doesn't matter what I think about whether I like or not, but I do think that in terms of the execution of the concept, if the most important things about the image are the hair, the light, the eyes, then the carpet does take away from that. And in this image, we've got the drone looking at her, which I think is an interesting use of the technology available, because I think that featuring aspects of technology in photographs say a lot. In the photograph selection here, I don't think I included any which used like mobile phones, but there were a few screens. But this is almost about the person's relationship to a second entity, like we had with the woman and her dog, and Miguel with his significant other. It's a similar relationship being shown in the image. And I think that, again, wearing the sunglasses, concealing the eyes, hiding away from the technology, that's a factor. Or it could just be a bright day, because that could just be something that I'm reading into it. But I think in terms of the concept, it's solid, but in terms of the execution, her, the drone, and the brick wall are not the ideal three. It would be her, the drone, and there would be a little bit more space to breathe. Whereas I think the wall makes it a little bit claustrophobic. It's a bit of an annoying pattern. It confuses within the frame. But other than that, I think that there's something to be had there. That's all of the 28 images that I've selected. I think we're going to do a Q&A session now. If there's anything that I've said that anyone if any of you have been writing a long essay about how much you disagree with something I specifically said about your photograph, that's great. I'd love to see it.
Incredible.
Otherwise,
time, almost bang on an hour.
Yeah. Oh, great. Let's do it like that more often. Perfect.
So yeah, please, if you've got any questions, write them in now. It would be nice though to see more of the entries. I'm just thinking of how people might be able to see this. I mean, I guess sharing them with those tags that you suggested.
Yep. There are a couple of hashtags. I can put them on the screen now if you want. Where
that'd be great. Because also, I guess people may reconsider some of the images they've taken and go back and try something else.
Absolutely, for sure. If there's anything that that you feel has made more or less sense and you want to retry it, then absolutely. These are the hashtags if you upload to Instagram. And if everyone searches around on Instagram for these and gives each other feedback, that'll be very valuable. Can everyone see that on my screen, by the way?
Yes.
Good.
And yeah, I mean, what I didn't realize, I'm not that great with Instagram, but I've recently found out that you can actually follow a hashtag.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's quite useful. So you'll start to see all these images popping into your feed. You don't have to kind of search for them all the time.
So yeah, if you share them here, if it's not one that was included, or if it is one that's included, and definitely reach out to each other and tell each other what a good job you did, or not, but less of that. But yeah, any questions that you may have now as a follow-up based on the feedback or based on the assignment itself, that'd be great to talk about now.
I think you've probably answered all the questions within the ongoing commentary.
So that's good then.
Kind of a nice way to do it, actually. A lot of positive comments. You can see it coming through as well. I forget.
Yeah, I've got the chat box open. Yeah. Well, that's good. Should we give it what time is it?
3:05.
3 o'clock. Should we give it 2 minutes, and then if there are no questions still, we can just wrap it up. You can kill the feed.
Sounds good to me. Can you put up maybe a grid of the images, those 28 images?
For sure. Sorry, it's because I've got not only the Lightroom, but I've also got all of the webinar stuff. I've got Zoom open, but I don't know that everyone can see that. So I've got a box here and a box here, which means that I can only see parts of my screen. There you go.
Yeah, you can do the what is it? Select all and hit N, and then we'll see them all. Shift tab removes all the panels.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Yeah, Nick's just saying you found the feedback very thorough and very interesting.
Good. Thank you so much.
Someone else didn't know you kids follow hashtags. Good. I'm glad I wasn't the only one. Yeah, great. I think we can end it there.
Let's wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, again.
And I'll be sending this recording. So if you want to go back and look at some of the really interesting comments, more from Simon than me, you'll be able to do that at your leisure. So yeah, thank you all for joining again, and hope to see you in another webinar in the future, perhaps one on diptychs in the future.
Hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic.